Hi everyone. So today I wanted to talk about some history, a little bit about some of my discoveries within my family's ancestry and my heritage. And especially for those of you who are Japanese American, or maybe you live around different Japan towns, you may have heard of, seen, or even attended some Day of Remembrance events already. So for those of you who are not familiar, the Day of Remembrance is on February 19th, which is coming up in about a week. And it is the date that the Japanese and Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from their homes and incarcerated. I'm trying to, use the proper language now. In schools, we were taught that they were everything other than incarceration, which is essentially what it was. So for those of you who may have been following me for a little while, myself and Aussie know that I lived in and grew up in Southern California, and we, about a year ago now, moved up to Washington State. And, I had actually forgotten that my grandmother was born in King County in and around the Seattle area. And so it wasn't until we attended the Washington State Fair last, I think, summer or spring, that I came across the Wall of Remembrance, which is now a permanent display in the area underneath the grandstands. I'm not really sure what that space is called, but it's like way far in the back, and you kind of have to travel around in order to find it or come across it. And because we were new to the state, we were trying to just explore everywhere, and that's how we stumbled across it. And that was made possible by efforts by organizations likely Seattle and Puyallup and maybe national JACLs, Japanese American Citizens League. And if I'm not mistaken, other organizations played a part in that. That part, I'm not 100% sure. But basically, I was able to find my grandmother's name on the wall, as well as her family members, of course, who was in middle school at the time. And so something that a lot of you may not know or realize is that, especially on the West Coast, there are a lot of fairgrounds and horse racing facilities, I don't know what to call them, that were actually used to centralize those who were forcibly removed from their homes and their businesses before being shipped off to the more permanent incarceration camps. And so the Washington State Fair is actually held on the grounds in which the Japanese and Japanese Americans from the surrounding areas, such as Seattle, Tacoma, Alaska, and other areas were sent there before having to be shipped off somewhere else. So this also includes the Santa Anita racetrack in Southern California, and essentially people were staying in the horse stalls. Yes, disgusting. They had very horribly made structures that were meant to be temporary housing for people, really poorly made, constructed very quickly, and horrible conditions, especially because a lot of these places that were chosen had not very good weather conditions. And for those of you who may or may not know, they were only essentially able to bring like whatever they could carry. And so February 19th marks the day of the signing of Executive Order 9066, which is what essentially caused what is similar to what's happening now with immigration, immigrants, ICE, and deportations and all of that. This also, and I'm going to have to break this up into probably several videos over the course of the next, month maybe. Who knows? Because there's so much to share, and so much of this history gets lost. And I just don't hear about the Japanese internment or incarceration in the media or a lot of people talking about it, even though it's so closely related to a lot of what's happening now, including the conversations about reparations. And some of you may know that some form of reparations were paid to those who were incarcerated. And so I'll probably save that for another video, but I have a lot to say about my personal journey with kind of digging more into my ancestry again, and also some of the feelings of grief that I had to kind of process and go through, of like not being able to see her original home because it was all turned into industrial land because of the Boeing airfield, which for those of you who are in Washington State, you might know that they are really horrible for participating and supporting a lot of the deportations in the area. And if I'm not mistaken, their airfield and or SeaTac, which is the main international airport, are used in order to deport people. So yeah, lots of problems. And I think because there are some very distinct historical events that have happened that are very closely aligned to what is happening now. I think it's important that, if you're going to be talking about a lot of these movements and things, that it's important to also get reminded of or do some research on how things have played out historically. And that includes, like I said, with the conversations about reparations and, solving the underlying issues and not just the temporary Band-Aid, because I can assure you that a lot more needs to be asked for, demanded, and held accountable for actual change to happen. So this was kind of sparked for me because I was able to attend one of the local Day of Remembrances in my area over the weekend. And, I didn't know what to expect. I just wanted to show up and see, what the programming was and hear from some of the speakers and the organizations. And I was able to go through some of the booths, and they were playing a documentary film, and I was able to get this pamphlet. And so how ironic, right, that the name they called the assembly center, it was called Camp Harmony. So I just found that really interesting. But yeah, so I've been looking a lot more into this. This is another really good organization, Densho, and they have an archive of a lot of history and historical items that people have donated. And so, for example, it was really cool, but one of I think it's a museum in Oregon, I was able to find a picture of an image. I'm assuming, I don't know how it was done, but I'm assuming that it was maybe a teacher in one of the camps that submitted things that they had kept from the students, and I was able to see something that my grandmother had made when she was in the camps. And so that was really cool, and it was a really cool experience for me to find it. And yeah, and of course it was just kind of funny to see that she was a little bit quirky in terms of what her picture was compared to some of the other kids. But the interesting thing too is that for those of you who follow me in terms of spirituality, tarot, and things like that, I was essentially able to feel into the emotions when I experienced that picture, as well as when I was at the Day of Remembrance. And it was a very, very distinct and overwhelming sense of sadness. And I thought that that was really interesting. And I came to the conclusion that I think it's really important for us as the ancestors of family members. And, I have so many people in my family, including those married in, that were at the camps around the different areas. My grandmother and her family were sent to Minidoka in Idaho. My grandfather and his family were sent to Wyoming, Heart Mountain, and then some of the others are posted in Arizona for some extended family members and such. But yeah, I I felt this overwhelming sense of sadness, and just like when I first saw the picture, I just uncontrollably like sobbed for several minutes. And I came to this conclusion when I could feel that sense of sadness coming up again when I was tapping into the energy of the ancestors. And, you know, whether or not you believe in all of this, take it or leave it. But as I was at the program, because I was in the space that they were actually housed, and I believe that the energies are still in that space. And so when I was tapping into it, I felt that deep sense of sadness and grief again, but I had to kind of cut it off because I didn't want to just start uncontrollably crying in the middle of the program. But when I was processing this experience later, what I came to the conclusion of is that it's really important for us as descendants of our ancestors to help tell their stories, or even our experiences, bringing awareness to the things that have happened, because I believe that we are actually helping them heal even after they've passed by experiencing some of these emotions for them. So especially for those of you who may be of the Asian American experience, Asian experience, or not, who was born into a life of internalizing emotions and acting like everything's okay even when it's not, and just kind of putting up with things, I feel like you might resonate a lot with this, of being able to express those emotions for them. And so I didn't see it as my grief, and I didn't see, some of it was, but you know, it was very distinctly different. But that was not my sadness. That was not my grief. And I was giving them the opportunity to release and express those emotions through me. So I kind of wanted to just come on here and remind folks that this did happen to over 100,000 people along the West Coast. And I think it's important that we continue to have these conversations, to bring them up into the conversations, and especially for those of you who are of a different experience, I think that now more than ever, it's so important for us to not only share our own stories, but to help uplift others, because something that I've noticed is that we're really good at influencing our own networks or putting out information and awareness to those who have the same or similar experiences. But for us to really have change and see change, we need to start uplifting each other's stories just as much as we're uplifting our own. So again, for those of you who may not be of this experience, or this may be new, or you feel like there are a lot of people that follow you that may benefit from hearing this type of information or these stories, then I would encourage you to consider sharing it with people, whether it's reposting or, you know, commenting and sharing it with people in messages and things like that. And so the more that we can help create that sense of allyship in a productive way, I think that things are going to progress in a way that we haven't seen before, because it's really now about going beyond our own circles and our own peers and folks who identify with us. So I just I'll talk more about this in another video. I think this ended up being a little bit more of like an introduction type of thing, and just kind of initially getting it out of my system. And I'll kind of narrow it down in future videos, but I think there's a lot more to talk about in terms of that experience and helping, again, to, in this sense, not necessarily uplift my own personal story, but the story of our ancestors, the story of people who were forcibly removed from their homes. And another kind of quick note that I'll make, for example, is that my grandmother lived in the greater Seattle area, was sent down to Puyallup, which is maybe 45 minutes to an hour south of that as the assembly center, and then from there was shipped off to Minidoka in Idaho. And then when the war ended and they were releasing all of the prisoners, I haven't dug into why this happened, and maybe some of you can comment in for me and let me know if you know the answer to this. But I believe one or two of the siblings, including herself, were sent to Chicago after, which I thought was weird. And one, I think, might have been sent to Oregon, and only one went back to Seattle. So after everything ended, because everyone basically had to sell their homes and their businesses and their belongings, or if they didn't sell it, their homes were ransacked and everything was stolen. They didn't actually have homes to go back to. So I'm just curious if anyone knows how they got sent to different places and where. And I think they were supposed to be almost like these reintegration into society centers or something, but I haven't gotten that far. So yeah, if you have any information, please put it for me and others in the chat. That would be great. But yeah, this is just my way of starting to uplift more Asian stories, Asian experiences, and historical events that I think are really pertinent to some of the conversations that are happening now. So thank you all for watching and listening, and I'll talk to you next time. And I totally forgot that the point of me even recording this video in the first place was to bring attention to this article, or these series of articles, if you were to Google it, that are online. And I originally saw it from the headlines of the Seattle Times. And this really just reminds me of some of the news that I've been seeing about like DEI programs, and some videos on Target and the shareholders and all of that, and how, you know, sometimes you can't just apologize for things, but this really just points out another example for the greater issue of people just don't know these stories anymore. They're barely, if even, taught in schools. And this is just another piece of lost history, even though it impacted so many people, thousands of people in each of these major cities across the West Coast. And so it's important to tell these stories so that decisions like this don't happen again, because if just one person knew the impact and the significance of this historical 2 years, by the way, not even just a little thing, and it wasn't really that long ago. We still have folks who were born in those camps or were incarcerated there that are still alive, and so that can't be that long ago, right? So yeah, it's just not okay. And yeah, so we just have to start talking about it.